This guy was a big-time recruit. He was compared to the best quarterback in school history in Connor Shaw, and he was also the first freshman quarterback to start this century. He had all the hype in the world, and at one point, it looked like he really was the future of South Carolina football. But as quickly as it all started, it ended, and right when he had an opportunity to make a name for himself, he really began to fade away. In today's video, we're going to talk about a former big-time player who obviously had all the hype in the world, and even was pretty good, but eventually flamed out. We're going to tell his whole story, go through his time at South Carolina, and talk about what eventually happened to him. So, without further ado, let's get started. So you're probably wondering who the subject of today's video is, and it is none other than former South Carolina quarterback Lorenzo Nunez. But in order to understand what happened to Lorenzo Nunez, we first need to go back in time and see who he is. Going back in time, Lorenzo Nunez was born in the state of Georgia and became a quarterback from a young age. Eventually, when he got to middle school, he decided to take the sport extremely seriously as he began working with a quarterback coach in 7th grade, and ever since then, his dream was to be a star college football quarterback and one day play in the NFL. Eventually, while at Harrison High School, Nunez began to blow up on the recruiting scene. As a senior, he passed for 803 yards and ran for 1,193 yards. This stat line is a little bit concerning, and we'll touch on that later in the video, but he was a 4-star recruit and would have to make a choice on where he would play college football. He decided to choose the Gamecocks over the likes of Ohio State and NC State, but according to a lot of Ohio State reporters, the offer to the Buckeyes was pretty loose, and many wondered if it was ever even committable. Basically, what happens is a lot of times these big-time programs will throw out offers to players that they think are going to blow up or performing really well. But if that guy does not end up reaching their ceiling or starts to play worse, then technically they do have an offer, but a lot of the times they know if they commit there, the coaching staff will not be happy and they will never ever dream about seeing the field. That's kind of what happened with Ohio State there, but maybe the reason why that happened was because of his arm. At one football camp, he was actually asked about it and had this to say, quote, "People who have actually seen me play know I can throw the ball. At camps, I threw the ball well. Coaches know I can throw the ball. I'm really accurate." You can't fully blame it on him, as one of the major problems for him was not in his control. It was his offensive style in high school, as they basically ran the ball every single play. That's why he only had 800 passing yards as a senior, but he did have a strong arm. He liked to compare himself to Connor Shaw, and he had extremely lofty expectations because of that. A lot of fans and beat writers were comparing him to Connor Shaw, and honestly, that's not fair, because Shaw is arguably the best quarterback in school history. One scout had this to say about Nunez though, quote, "Nunez's film reveals the physical tool and athleticism coaches look for in a dual-threat quarterback. Though he is a bit raw as a passer, he really does know how to use his athleticism to his advantage, and at 6'3", he demonstrates a powerful arm and has both the playmaking ability and speed that gives nightmares to opposing defenses." So yeah, he was now headed to South Carolina, and his goal was to start from day one. He said if he didn't start day one, then he'd like to start day 2. Some sources did list him as a 4-star player, but according to 24/7 Sports, he was a 3-star recruit, the number 15 dual-threat quarterback, and the 439th best player in the class of 2015. He'd arrived 4th on the depth chart, but how would he do? So when Nunez arrived in Columbia, South Carolina, both Connor Mitch and Perry Orth were ahead of him. Steve Spurrier was the head coach, and South Carolina was at a point where they were expected to be good every year. Things would change pretty quickly as Connor Mitch would get hurt in week 1, and this would open up the job. Former walk-on Perry Orth would take over, but if he struggled, there was definitely a path for Lorenzo to play. This would end up happening as after South Carolina got pounded by Georgia, they announced that a quarterback switch would happen. Nunez scored a touchdown against the Bulldogs and showed flash in that game, so Spurrier named him the starter against UCF the following week. If he in fact did that, he'd become the first true freshman quarterback to start for South Carolina since 1999, making him the first of the century. After that Georgia game and the flash that he showed, Coach Spurrier had this to say, quote, "He did okay. He made some nice runs and actually hit a few passes. He gives us a spark in there running the ball. We probably need to spread out a little bit and run and get him out of the pocket and throw it, but that's just where we are. Let's give Lorenzo a chance to go out and play and see how he does." In that game against UCF, he was great. Nunez threw for 184 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 123 yards on the ground. The Gamecocks would end up beating the Knights 31-14, and this was a huge game. Obviously, like all college football fans, we overreact, and after that matchup, I bet South Carolina fans were thinking they found the second coming of Connor Shaw or Stephen Garcia. The head coach, Steve Spurrier, was extremely impressed. He said, quote, "I think he played better than we all anticipated. We knew he could run, but gosh, he hit a bunch of passes. I think he's a gamer. Then, that Missouri game happened. As you guys know, I'm a diehard Mizzou fan, and this Missouri team was not any good. In fact, this was the first career start for Drew Lock, and he would duel against Nunez in this game. Lock would throw for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Nunez would struggle. He went 15 of 24 for 172 yards, a touchdown, and 3 interceptions. He did have 60 yards rushing, but this game seemingly broke his confidence as they lost 24-10, and Nunez probably realized he had a long way to go. Things would get even more difficult for him as on October 12, 2015, the famous head coach Steve Spurrier decided to resign. This would come after the first 6 games of the year, in which South Carolina went 2-4, and they went 0-4 in the SEC. Mizzou was horrendous, and the fact that they lost that game probably put him a little bit over the edge. From there, Sean Elliott was named the interim head coach, and he was going to give Nunez a chance. From there, both the Gamecocks and Lorenzo would struggle, and he messed up multiple times, and Elliott had this to say about him. Quote, "We really can't understand why he's messing up other than just the fact he's not ready to go in there and play. The focus is something he has been lacking. We want to get him a little bit more involved, but we can't do that unless he puts everything into it. We have to eliminate those foolish mistakes. It's little things here and there." Eventually, Coach Elliott decided to go with Perry Orth instead, and Nunez's time at quarterback was pretty much over. They felt they needed to go in a different direction, and after the season, they told Nunez to move to wide receiver. This caused him in turn to move schools. He said, quote, "I didn't really want to play wide receiver. I've been playing quarterback since 7th grade, and I wanted to stick with it." Originally, it did actually seem he was going to stick with being a receiver, but after an injury in spring practice of 2016, he was done. Nunez would finish his South Carolina career with 376 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions, while rushing for 375 yards and 2 touchdowns. He became the second quarterback to leave the program alongside Connor Mitch, and the guy who was once compared to Connor Shaw was now gone. Muschamp realized this and told the media this, quote, "He's going to transfer. He wants to play quarterback, and we're trying to help him right now through that process and find some spots where he feels like he's got an opportunity." Maybe Muschamp did help, but he would enter the portal and he would find his next school from a non-South Carolina coach. Matt Barrett was the offensive coordinator at Tulane, and he apparently put him in touch with a coach at Southeastern Louisiana, and after visiting, Nunez committed. He was going to get a chance to start at quarterback, but it would be at a lower level. After not playing in 2016, he would step up and start 9 games in 2017. He threw for 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns, and also rushed for 5 scores and 353 yards on the ground. Because of that, he was named the Conference Newcomer of the Year, and there was a lot of hype for him in 2018. But just like at South Carolina, he was told to move position. In 2018, he played in 9 games and was primarily used as a receiver. He ended up catching 15 passes for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also had 147 yards and a touchdown on the ground. So what ultimately went wrong for Lorenzo Nunez? Well, I think it's for 3 reasons. 1, his high school system messed him up. The fact that he couldn't really develop his arm during that time definitely stunted his growth, and when you try to go from running the ball a ton as a senior to starting as a freshman in the SEC, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. 2, when he did play at South Carolina, they were arguably in their worst spot of the decade. They went through an interim head coach, had their best coach in school history retire, and they weren't really that talented that year, so Nunez didn't have a whole lot to work with, and expectations were way too high on him. Thirdly, I think it's partially Nunez's fault. He was too stubborn. I know he dreamed about playing a quarterback, but had he just moved to receiver and stuck with it, and maybe he could have become one of the next best South Carolina receivers. They've had guys such as Pharaoh Cooper, Brian Edwards, and Deebo Samuel, so they know how to develop at that position, and he had the size and athleticism, so I'll always wonder what would have happened if he had just played receiver. Either way though, he is a big what if when it comes to South Carolina football, and I'll definitely be rooting for him in whatever he does in the next stage of life. What do you guys think though? If you're a South Carolina fan, what went wrong for Lorenzo Nunez? If you're a fan of another school, who's a player I could take a look at in my next video? And also, drop a suggestion for any other video I could do. Before you go, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.